what is the first question you'd like to ask?
Yeah. So I have some business experience, and now I'm kind of shifting my focus from my business to helping other entrepreneurs out. And this creating content and being a creator is all relatively new to me. And so I'm curious to hear about kind of your early days of how you persevered through. I'm guessing at some point you didn't have an audience. And how did you?
Yeah, we all start at zero.
So how did you get through those days? And what was that like?
So I have a few thoughts and stuff to share about this, but let me first ask you, as you're in it now, what are you finding are the hardest parts?
So for me, first of all, the content creation takes a lot longer than I thought. So I have a lot of ideas, but trying to write them down, and I have a podcast. I'm scripting my podcast because I want to get all my ideas out there, and trying to get everything in there weekly, consistently, and in an organized manner where there's a really good hook, a main body of the content, and then a conclusion. Like, that's been really different for me, trying to organize ideas and thoughts. And so I guess the biggest challenge for me is kind of content creation. And then when I put out these pieces of content, I don't know what the reception will be. And a lot of times there's no reception. And I'm like, okay, well, I spent a lot of time thinking about all this, but sometimes there's just nothing. Yeah, that's been a little bit challenging, but at the same time, I'm learning to accept that this is like a science experiment. And so I just put things out there, see what works, then iterate based on that. But it's been really humbling because I'm used to, I've grown businesses, so I'm used to.
You've had a lot of success, and now this is a whole new thing. It takes time. No, I think everything you said, I'm sure everyone can relate to, both people that have reached a certain level of success or audience because they remember what it was like to start, and people that are just starting out and trying to figure it out. As you said, it is a lot of work, and initially it takes time. No matter how great your content is, it takes time to grow an audience. And there is a lot of, I made this thing and I put it out and nobody cared, or one or two people cared, and you feel stuck at that level, and it can be for a while. So let me go back and tell you a little bit about kind of my trajectory in early days and when I was in that moment, and some things that I think helped me in retrospect, because I think a lot of people, they don't get past that moment. They either give up, or it's too frustrating, or they think it's never going to work. And so I do think that's a key moment for a lot of people. So just for some context, I've been doing some version of this sort of online content thing for a really long time. So my first blog was in 1999. And so I started my early, quote unquote, early days were at a time where there was no YouTube. My first blog was on Blogger, and you couldn't even upload a photo. So it was literally just some text and links. So it was no social media. And I remember people were like, you have a blog? What's a blog? That's crazy. Like, the concept that any of this could be a business or have a big audience or any of that stuff almost didn't really exist. So the nice thing was, there was a little less of that pressure than there probably is now, where you're like, well, these other people are getting an audience. Why can't I get an audience? Like, I just thought it was really cool to be able to like self-publish something, to be able to take my ideas and thoughts and put them out on the internet and have a few of my friends read them or whatever. That helped in some ways, because I didn't have what we have now of the self-imposed pressure. I certainly never thought, oh, this is going to be a career for me. It was just like a thing I was doing. And it was exciting because it was all so new. So it was exciting to just have the opportunity to put stuff out into the world. So that certainly helped me. But that said, over the years, as I got more and more serious about it and social media came, and I was still starting from zero, because it wasn't like I had a huge audience or anything like that. And so I can definitely relate to what it's like to start now. A few of the things that I think really helped me. One is, from the very beginning, and I'm talking about when I did start to take it more seriously versus that initial blog, which was kind of just for fun or whatever. I always had a long-term view. So I was never trying to go viral. I never had the expectation that I was going to get this big audience right away. I wasn't even really trying to monetize it. Even my current newsletter now, which I started in 2016, I did not directly monetize it at all for like over 4 years. So I didn't have these sort of huge expectations. I was like, look, I'm doing this thing. I like to grow an audience. Hopefully it's steadily growing, even if it's slow and even if there's peaks and valleys or plateaus. So I think that really helped. I think a lot of people go into it thinking it's going to happen overnight, and that's not going to happen. Or they see people who are like, oh, look, that person added 100,000 followers in 6 months. And it's like looking at a lottery winner and going, I'm going to get rich by winning the lottery. Like, yeah, maybe you will, but probably not. So that I think is part of it. The other part of it is, and I think this was very true again when I started because so much was new, but it's still true today because things are always evolving. I was always experimenting. I was always, well, let me see what happens if I use this tool or I write this kind of blog post or I do. It was all sort of one ongoing experiment to me. And through that experimentation, I was trying to learn what worked for me, but also what I liked, what I didn't like, what I wanted to do, what sort of felt right. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do it this way? And I think that mindset of this is all one big experiment removed a lot of the pressure of failing because it was like, well, no, I'm just trying to find my way. I don't expect to, it's funny how I had someone say to me once, I used to run social media for the Academy of Motion Pictures and other stuff. And I was talking to someone else who ran social media for a large company or organization. And they said, what's really unique about this job is everybody thinks because they're on Facebook, they know what you should do on Facebook. Like it's like, nobody's going up to a technical engineer and being like, I'm going to tell you how you should do it because they know they don't have that expertise. But they don't have that expertise in social media either, but they feel like they do because they use the platforms. They don't realize it's a whole other thing. So that experimental mindset and that acknowledgement of why should I be an expert when I've been doing this for 6 months? Like this is going to take time for me, just like anything else, for me to figure out and get good at. The other thing that I think helped me was it was never purely about attention or vanity for me. I genuinely wanted to help people and I genuinely wanted to provide value to people. And I think there's a lot of people that I see it all the time. I see it a lot on Instagram, but that's a whole other story. I see a lot of people where they're running their business, but they're really in it for the likes, really in it for that attention boost, for the dopamine. And you can see it, right? You can see that they're doing posts and they're doing all the sort of things they're supposed to do to get likes and get engagement. But you can see that engagement is hollow and it's not actually leading to business for them. And I'm not saying they're doing this consciously, but I do think there's people that are more attracted to that. And I think those people are way more likely to struggle either way, because if they struggle to grow an audience, they struggle to get the attention they want, that's going to feel really bad and they're going to get really down on themselves. But even if they get that attention and their business is failing, they get frustrated the other way because they go, in their mind, they're going, I'm doing all the right things. I built this huge audience and my business isn't working. So that I think is the thing that really helped me, is that I really wasn't in it for that. The other thing I would say is I think it's helpful to, when you're in that space, and this is something I think that I only learned or realized later on once I had built something of an audience, that there are a lot of advantages to not having an audience and to those early days that I think people don't realize or think about. There's a freedom to it. There's a freedom that, and I'm lucky I have a great audience. I don't get trolls. I don't get haters. I don't get a lot of negativity coming back at me, but anything I say or put out is going to be seen by a lot more people. That's great, but it can make it harder at times. Am I hesitant to talk about this or post that? Or are people going to misunderstand this thing or whatever, or is this off topic and all that kind of stuff? One of the advantages of not having a lot of people paying attention to you is you can kind of do what you want. Right. And there's no real repercussions and you can play around and really kind of find yourself as a creator. The other thing along those lines is it's funny, like little things, little bits of progress can be so exciting. Like I remember, and I think anyone you talk to, no matter how like successful they become, will remember the first dollar they made online. I remember when I sold a $10 PDF and my mind was blown because I was like, oh my God, like somebody across the world bought this idea, this PDF that I wrote for $10. Like, this is even possible. This is crazy, right? And whereas now, and again, this is not meant as a humble brag at all, but now when that becomes a more regular occurrence, it's not quite, it's not the same of excitement. Right. Now it's, oh, but this didn't do as well as the previous thing I did or whatever. It changes that dynamic. And then the last thing I would say is that, and I highly recommend this. It's funny. I see this narrative of you can just be a creator and work for yourself. And you see a lot of people, especially young people starting out even before they go to school or have a job or whatever. And that's fine. But I think there are massive advantages to having a job. And again, you've had a successful career already. You've done things. And I actually think that's a huge advantage. My first blog was in 1999. I was doing stuff all throughout that. I didn't go full time as an entrepreneur until 2016. So what that means is for all those years when I was growing my audience and experimenting and doing all this stuff, I didn't have to make a living off of it.
That's a good point.
Makes it huge. That removes so much of the pressure. It allows you to make different decisions. Like I see a lot of people who are trying to do the creator entrepreneur thing and they're trying to make a living on it. And that makes everything more difficult. Plus all those years that I had jobs working in marketing and journalism and entertainment industry, I learned a ton of stuff. I made a ton of relationships. It all informed me getting to where I wanted to go. So I think that's the other piece of this that I would say is you can remove some of that pressure of early days. Even if you have a part-time job, a separate revenue stream, or something, I think it's a lot of pressure to start from zero and say, okay, now this is how I'm going to make my living and I need to go build an audience. It can be done, but I do think it makes it more challenging.
Got it. So did you find yourself when you first started out, I'm sure your content and your audience kind of evolved over time, but I'm curious to hear if your messaging towards the beginning when you first started out is different or similar to what you're doing now. I'm sure it's kind of evolved as you've changed.
Yeah, it's completely evolved. And I think in some ways you're talking a little bit about niche because messaging and positioning really relates to niche. And I see that something as forever evolving. And it certainly has for me. So years ago, I was working in the comedy industry and I started a blog called Connected Comedy that was all about helping comedians grow their audience, right? Now that's similar to what I do now, but it was very comedy specific and it was successful. I grew an audience, but somewhere along the line, I was no longer in my day life working in the comedy industry. And I kind of was like, why am I giving comedy I kind of evolved out of it. And so that's when I eventually shifted and moved away from that and initially went broader with For the Interested, which is originally for anyone that wants to improve in their work, art, and life. And then that got narrowed down to creators and creators got narrowed down to creative entrepreneurs. And it's forever evolving. And I think that's important for people to realize too, because I think people get paralyzed in the beginning thinking they need to, well, if I say this is my niche, I'm stuck in that niche forever. Right. And it's like, no, you're not. Like whatever, even in success, it's going to evolve and change. So yeah, it's definitely an evolution.